The morning sun cast long shadows across the Royal Training Grounds as Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted. His grip on the wooden bow, his weathered hands, marked by years of military service, trembled slightly as he drew back the arrow. The crowd of young recruits gathered behind him, their faces filled with anticipation and barely concealed smirks. "Watch closely." "Boys," called out Lieutenant Hayes, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Our esteemed captain is about to demonstrate the fine art of archery." The recruits snickered, remembering the countless stories they'd heard about Marcus's legendary poor aim during public demonstrations. Marcus had served the Royal Guard for 23 years, climbing through the ranks not through exceptional marksmanship, but through unwavering loyalty, strategic thinking, and an uncanny ability to train others. At 45, his graying beard and deep-set brown eyes reflected the wisdom of countless battles and training sessions. Yet today, like so many other public demonstrations, he knew he would become the subject of whispered jokes and disappointed glances. The target stood 50 meters away, a standard archery board with concentric circles painted in fading colors. The bullseye seemed to mock him as he raised the bow, feeling the familiar weight that had become both friend and enemy over the years. Behind him, he could hear the shuffling feet of the recruits, some placing quiet bets on just how badly their captain would miss this. "Time 20 silver coins says he hits the grass again," whispered Private Collins, a cocky young man from the northern provinces who had joined the Guard only 3 months prior. His comment earned muffled laughter from his companions. "I'll take that bet," replied Private Jensen, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly confident in the captain's abilities either. "Maybe he'll at least hit the target frame this time." Marcus heard every word, as he always did during these demonstrations. The mockery had become as routine as his morning drills, and he had learned to accept it as part of his burden. The irony wasn't lost on him that the same recruits who laughed at his public displays of archery had all improved dramatically under his guidance in private training sessions. The truth was something Marcus had never shared with anyone, not even his closest friend, Lieutenant Commander Harrison. Years ago, during a covert mission behind enemy lines, Marcus had taken a crossbow bolt to his right shoulder. The injury had healed improperly, leaving him with a subtle but persistent tremor that made precision shooting nearly impossible under pressure or when being watched. The military physicians had cleared him for duty, noting that the injury didn't significantly impact his other abilities, but they hadn't understood the psychological impact of public failure. As he drew the bowstring back, Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his shoulder, the slight shake that would throw off his aim. The recruits fell silent, waiting for another spectacular miss that would fuel their conversations for days to come. He could see Lieutenant Hayes checking his pocket watch, clearly eager to move on to other training exercises. The arrow flew from the bow with a soft whistle. Sailing through the crisp morning air, it struck the target with a solid thud, embedding itself in the outer ring, far from the center, but at least on the board. A collective gasp went up from the recruits, not because it was a good shot, but because it wasn't the complete disaster they had expected. "Well," Lieutenant Hayes announced with barely concealed disappointment, "at least you hit the target this time, Captain." Perhaps there's hope yet. His words were meant to sound encouraging, but the underlying mockery was clear to everyone present. Marcus lowered the bow, his face showing no emotion despite the embarrassment burning in his chest. He had long ago learned to mask his feelings during these public humiliations. The recruits began to disperse, their excitement deflated by the mediocre result. They had hoped for either a miracle shot or a spectacular failure, and the mundane reality left them feeling cheated. As the training ground emptied, Marcus remained standing before the target, studying the arrow that quivered slightly in the morning breeze. He thought about the countless hours he spent in the early morning darkness, when the grounds were empty and no eyes were upon him. In those quiet moments before dawn, his arrows found their mark with deadly precision. But something about being watched, about the weight of expectation and the memory of past failures, caused his hands to betray him every time Private Collins lingered nearby, collecting his winnings from the other recruits who had bet against Marcus hitting the target at all. "Not bad for an old man," he said loudly enough for the captain to hear. Maybe with a few more years of practice, you'll actually hit what you're aiming for. The young private's words stung more than Marcus cared to admit. Collins was talented, perhaps the most naturally gifted archer among the current group of recruits, but his arrogance often overshadowed his abilities. Marcus had watched him during training, noting both his exceptional skill and his troubling attitude toward authority and teamwork. "Private Collins," Marcus called out, his voice calm but carrying the authority of decades of military service. "Report to my office at sunset. We have some things to discuss about your training schedule." Collins shrugged, clearly unbothered by the summons. "Yes, sir," he replied with mock respect, earning another round of quiet laughter from his fellow recruits as Marcus finally turned to leave the training grounds. He caught sight of a figure watching from the shadows of the castle walls. Lady Catherine, the king's younger sister, had been observing the demonstration from a distance. Their eyes met briefly across the courtyard, and he saw something in her expression that surprised him. Pity mixed with what might have been understanding. Lady Catherine had always been different from the other nobles, more interested in the daily workings of the castle and the lives of those who served than in court, gossip, and elaborate ceremonies. She had probably witnessed many of these demonstrations, watching as the man responsible for training the kingdom's finest archers struggled with his own. "Bow." Marcus nodded respectfully in her direction before making his way toward the castle. Already planning the private conversation he would have with Collins that evening, the young man's talent was undeniable, but his attitude needed correction before it infected the other recruits or, worse, got someone killed in actual combat. The day was still young, and Marcus had many responsibilities ahead of him. But the sting of public failure would linger as it always did, reminding him of the complex burden he carried as both teacher and cautionary tale. The sun had barely risen when Marcus made his way to the secluded training area deep within the castle grounds. This hidden courtyard, known only to a select few, had become his sanctuary over the years, surrounded by high stone walls and ancient oak trees. It was here that Marcus practiced in solitude, away from the mocking eyes and whispered comments of the recruits in the pre-dawn darkness. His movements were fluid and precise. The bow in his hands felt like an extension of his body, and his arrows found their targets with deadly accuracy. The familiar targets he had set up bore testimony to his skill, with clusters of arrows grouped tightly in the center rings. This was the Marcus Thornfield that only he knew existed. The archer whose abilities had once earned him recognition in competitions across the kingdom for his injury. As he knocked another arrow, Marcus heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel behind him. He turned to see Lady Catherine approaching, her dark cloak pulled tight against the morning chill. She moved with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to moving, unnoticed through the castle corridors. "Forgive the intrusion, Captain," she said softly, her breath visible in the cool air. "I often walked the grounds at this hour and heard the sound of arrows striking targets." Marcus quickly lowered his bow, embarrassed to have been discovered in his secret practice. "My lady, I didn't realize anyone else was awake at this hour. I can move to another location if I'm disturbing you, please," Catherine said, gesturing toward the targets. "I've always found the sound of archery practice rather soothing. Besides, I'm curious to see the skills that produced such precise groupings." She nodded toward the targets, where dozens of arrows clustered in tight patterns around the bull's eyes. Marcus felt his cheeks redden. "Those are from multiple sessions, my lady. I practice here regularly." "Multiple sessions that all resulted in such accuracy?" Catherine stepped closer, studying the targets with genuine interest. "Captain, I witnessed yesterday's demonstration in the main courtyard. The contrast is rather remarkable." The weight of her observation hung in the air between them. Marcus had always assumed his private skill remained his secret, but Lady Catherine's keen eyes had apparently noticed more than he realized. He found himself trapped between his instinct to deflect and an unexpected desire to confide in someone who seemed to understand. "The injury I sustained years ago affects my aim when I'm being observed," he admitted quietly. "The pressure, the expectations, the memory of past failures, they all combine to make my hands shake. But here alone, the tremor doesn't affect me the same way." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. Yet you continue to conduct public demonstrations. Knowing the outcome will likely be disappointing. It's part of my duty, Marcus replied. The recruits need to see their instructors participate in the same exercises they're asked to perform. Even if my performance is lacking, principle remains important. And what do you suppose those recruits learn from watching their most skilled instructor fail repeatedly? Catherine's question wasn't accusatory, but genuinely curious. Marcus had never really considered this perspective. That even experienced soldiers can struggle with certain aspects of their training, I suppose. That persistence is more important than natural talent. Perhaps Catherine mused. But I wonder if they might learn more from understanding the full truth of your situation. Before Marcus could respond, they heard voices approaching from the direction of the main training grounds. Marcus quickly gathered his arrows, recognizing the distinctive laugh of Private Collins among the approaching voices. The last thing he needed was for the cocky recruit to discover his secret training area. I should go, Catherine said, understanding the need for discretion. But Captain, I hope you'll consider what I've said. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from truth rather than mystery. She disappeared into the shadows between the oak trees, just as Collins and two other recruits rounded the corner, their arms full of training equipment. They stopped short when they saw Marcus, clearly surprised to find their captain in this secluded area. Sir Collins said with his usual barely concealed smirk, "We didn't expect to find anyone else here. We were looking for a quiet place to practice our formations without disturbing the other units." Marcus studied the three young men, noting their genuine surprise and the training equipment they carried. Perhaps their motives were sincere, or perhaps Collins was simply curious about areas of the castle he hadn't yet explored. Either way, Marcus couldn't fault them for seeking additional practice time. "This area is suitable for small group training," Marcus replied evenly. "Just ensure you clean up after yourselves, and don't damage the existing targets." As he turned to leave, Private Jensen called out, "Sir, those arrow groupings in the targets were those from your practice." Marcus paused, Catherine's words echoing in his mind. Here was an opportunity to reveal the truth, to show these young men that their assumptions about his abilities were based on incomplete information. But the habits of years held strong. He found himself deflecting once again. "Various people use this area for practice," he said simply. "The arrows could be from anyone." Collins examined one of the targets more closely. He's pulling out an arrow and studying its fletching. "These are regulation guard arrows, sir. Not the practice arrows the recruits use." The observation hung in the air. Marcus realized that Collins was sharper than his arrogant exterior suggested. The young man was putting together pieces of information, perhaps beginning to understand that there was more to his captain than met the eye. "As I said, various people practice here," Marcus repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Later that morning, as Marcus conducted the regular training session with the full group of recruits, he found himself watching Collins more carefully. The young man's archery remained impressive, but there was something different in his demeanor. Gone was the usual smirking confidence, placed by a thoughtful attention to Marcus's instruction that hadn't been there before. During individual coaching sessions, Marcus worked with each recruit to improve their technique. When he reached Collins, the young man looked up with an expression that might have been respect. Sir Collins said quietly, "I've been thinking about what you said regarding the importance of consistent practice, regardless of conditions or circumstances." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Oh yes, sir. I realize I've been focusing too much on performing well when others are watching, rather than developing skills that remain reliable under all conditions." The comment was surprisingly mature, coming from Collins. And Marcus wondered if the young man's discovery of the secluded training area had prompted some personal reflection. Perhaps seeing evidence of dedicated practice, regardless of its source, had sparked something in the recruit's mind. Consistent practice under varied conditions is indeed important, Marcus agreed. True skill isn't just about performing well when everything is perfect. It's about maintaining your abilities when circumstances are difficult, when you're tired, stressed, or facing unfamiliar situations. Yes, sir. I'd like to request permission to spend additional time practicing, perhaps in different locations and conditions, to better prepare myself for real-world situations. Marcus studied the young man's face. looking for signs of mockery or a hidden agenda, but found only genuine determination. Permission granted. Private Collins. I commend your dedication to improvement. As the training session concluded and the recruits dispersed, Marcus found himself thinking about Catherine's words and Collins's unexpected change in attitude. Perhaps there was wisdom in considering alternative approaches to the challenges he faced, both in his own struggles and in his methods of teaching others. 3 weeks had passed since the encounter in the secluded training area. Marcus noticed a remarkable transformation in Private Collins. The young man who had once been the source of mocking comments and arrogant behavior now approached, training with focused intensity. More intriguingly, Collins had begun arriving early to training sessions and staying late, often requesting additional instruction on techniques he had already mastered. The change hadn't gone unnoticed by the other recruits either. Private Jensen approached Marcus after one particularly rigorous training session, his brow furrowed with confusion. "Sir, what's gotten into Collins lately?" Jensen asked, toweling off sweat from his forehead. "He's been acting different ever since that morning we found you in the back courtyard. More serious, I suppose." Marcus considered his response carefully. Perhaps he's simply maturing, realizing that military service requires more than just natural talent. Maybe, Jensen replied, though he sounded unconvinced. But it's more than that. Yesterday I saw him practicing in the rain, sir. In the rain. Collins used to complain if the sun wasn't shining perfectly during our regular sessions. The conversation stayed with Marcus throughout the day. That evening, as he made his usual rounds, checking the security of the castle grounds, he decided to investigate what had prompted such a dramatic change in Collins's behavior. His path took him past the secluded training area, where he was surprised to see flickering torchlight illuminating the courtyard, moving quietly. Marcus positioned himself where he could observe without being seen. Collins stood alone in the courtyard, methodically shooting arrows at targets placed at various distances and angles. But what struck Marcus wasn't just the late-night practice. It was the quality of Collins's shooting. The young man's accuracy had improved dramatically, but more importantly, his form had evolved to incorporate techniques that Marcus had only taught to the most advanced archers. As Marcus watched, Collins retrieved his arrows and moved to a position where he had to shoot around obstacles he had positioned throughout the courtyard. The exercise was one Marcus had developed years ago for training archers to shoot effectively in combat conditions. But he had never taught it to the current group of recruits. Someone else had to have instructed Collins in these advanced techniques. Impressive, isn't it? Marcus spun around to find Lady Catherine approaching from behind, her footsteps having been masked by the sound of arrows striking targets. She moved with the same quiet grace he had observed during their previous encounter. "My lady," Marcus said, inclining his head respectfully. "I didn't expect to encounter you here again. I make it a point to observe things that interest me," Catherine replied. Her attention focused on Collins's practice session, and young Collins has become quite interesting recently. Marcus studied her expression in the torchlight. "You've been watching him?" "I've been watching both of you," Catherine corrected. "Collins has been seeking additional instruction, hasn't he? Instruction in techniques that aren't part of the standard curriculum." The implication of her words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You've been teaching him?" Catherine smiled, an expression that held both mischief and satisfaction. "I've been sharing certain observations about archery techniques, yes. Collins sought me out after that morning in the courtyard, asking questions about advanced training methods he had heard existed but were not being taught to recruits." Marcus felt a mixture of admiration and concern. "My lady, while I appreciate your interest in the training of our soldiers, advanced techniques require years of foundation work to master safely. Collins, despite his talent, hasn't had sufficient time to develop the necessary fundamentals, which is why I suggested he seek additional guidance from someone with more expertise in those areas," Catherine replied smoothly. "Someone whose knowledge of archery might be more comprehensive than his current instruction would suggest." The realization dawned slowly. Collins's questions, his sudden dedication to practice, his mysterious improvement in technique, it had all been orchestrated to bring Marcus to this moment. Catherine had been maneuvering both of them toward this confrontation. "You want me to train him properly?" Marcus said. I want you to train all of them properly, Catherine corrected. Collins is gifted, but he's not the only one who could benefit from advanced instruction. The kingdom faces uncertain times, Captain. Our soldiers need every advantage we can provide them. Marcus watched Collins complete another difficult shot, threading an arrow between two barriers to strike a target positioned behind them. The technique was flawless, but Marcus could see the subtle inefficiencies that would limit the young man's progress. Without proper foundational correction, advanced training requires individual attention, Marcus said slowly. Time that would need to be taken from other duties and responsibilities the king has already approved expanded training protocols, Catherine replied. All that's needed is an instructor capable of implementing them. Marcus turned to face her fully. You've already spoken to the king about this. I spoke to my brother about the need for enhanced military preparedness. Yes. I mentioned that our guard possessed exceptional training capabilities that weren't being fully utilized due to, shall we say, presentation challenges? The delicate phrasing didn't mask the directness of her meaning. Catherine had somehow convinced the king to authorize advanced training without revealing Marcus's personal struggles with public performance. And if I can't overcome those presentation challenges? Marcus asked. Catherine's expression grew serious. Then perhaps it's time to consider alternative methods of presentation, before Marcus could ask what she meant. Collins completed his practice session and began collecting his equipment. The young man moved efficiently, clearly following a routine he had established over multiple nights of solitary training. Collins, Marcus called out. Stepping into the torchlight, the recruit straightened immediately, his face showing surprise and perhaps a touch of guilt at being discovered. Sir, I didn't realize you were there. How long have you been practicing these advanced techniques? Marcus asked directly. Collins glanced nervously toward Catherine, who nodded encouragingly. About 2 weeks, sir. Lady Catherine has been providing guidance on methods for improving accuracy in difficult conditions. And why didn't you mention this during our regular training sessions? The young man shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't sure if it was appropriate, sir. The techniques seemed more advanced than what we were covering in group sessions. Marcus studied Collins's face, seeing genuine uncertainty rather than the arrogance that had previously characterized the recruit's behavior. The young man had been trying to improve himself while being respectful of the established training structure. Collins, I want you to demonstrate the shooting pattern you just completed, Marcus said, making a decision. But this time, I want you to explain your thought process for each shot. For the next hour, Marcus worked with Collins, correcting subtle flaws in his technique and explaining the theoretical foundations behind the advanced methods. Catherine observed from the shadows, saying nothing but clearly paying close attention to both the instruction and Collins's responses. As the session concluded, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in years, he had conducted an archery lesson without the crushing weight of public expectations, and his instruction had been both effective and enjoyable. Collins, he said as the young man prepared to leave, report to the advanced training courtyard tomorrow at dawn. Bring Jensen and Rodriguez with you. It's time to expand your education. Collins's face lit up with genuine excitement. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. After the recruit had departed, Catherine approached Marcus. That was well done, Captain. I think you may have found a solution to your presentation challenges. Marcus nodded slowly, beginning to understand her strategy. Small groups, focused instruction, practical application, rather than formal demonstration. Exactly. The kingdom needs soldiers who can perform under pressure, not audiences who can appreciate perfect form. Perhaps it's time to prioritize substance over spectacle. As they walked back toward the castle, Marcus found himself feeling hopeful for the first time in years. Catherine's carefully orchestrated intervention had shown him a path forward, a way to share his knowledge and skills without the paralyzing fear of public failure that had plagued him for so long. The advanced training program had been running for 6 weeks when the first real test of Marcus's methods arrived in the form of a royal hunting expedition. King Edmund had announced a grand hunt to celebrate the visiting delegation from the neighboring kingdom of Aldermere, and tradition dictated that the royal guard would provide both security and hunting support for the event. Marcus stood in the castle's strategy room, studying the detailed maps of the hunting grounds while Lieutenant Hayes paced nervously behind him. The upcoming expedition would require the guards to demonstrate their archery skills not just for their own king, but for foreign dignitaries who would undoubtedly compare the abilities of their respective military forces. "Sir," Hayes said, his voice tight with anxiety, "perhaps it would be better if I led the archery demonstration this time. The king specifically requested a display of our finest marksmanship, given the international nature of the event." Double quotes. Marcus understood the unspoken concern. Hayes had witnessed too many of Marcus's public failures to feel confident about his performance in front of foreign guests. The suggestion was tactful, but it still stung. "The king requested me specifically," Marcus replied, though he shared Hayes's concerns. "Lady Catherine spoke with him about my involvement in the advanced training program." What Marcus didn't mention was the growing reputation his small group training sessions had earned throughout the castle. Collins, Jensen, and Rodriguez had become formidable archers under his guidance, and word of their improvement had reached the king's inner circle. Unfortunately, none of the nobles had witnessed Marcus's private instruction methods, only heard second-hand reports of the results. The door to the strategy room opened, and Collins entered with a message scroll. The young man had been promoted to corporal after his exceptional performance in recent exercises, and his transformation from arrogant recruit to dedicated soldier had become a source of pride for Marcus. "Sir," Collins said, offering the scroll, "this just arrived from the Aldermere delegation. They're requesting details about the hunting demonstration, including the specific skills that will be displayed." Marcus read through the message, noting the formal tone and the subtle implications within the diplomatic language. The Aldermere military was known for their exceptional archers, and this request felt more like intelligence gathering than polite inquiry. "Collins," Marcus said thoughtfully, "how would you and the others feel about participating in the hunting demonstration?" The young man's eyes lit up with excitement. "We would be honored, sir. But are you sure we're ready for such a public display?" "You've mastered techniques that most guards never learn," Marcus replied. "Your accuracy under pressure has been tested repeatedly in our training scenarios. I believe you're more than ready." Hayes looked skeptical. "Sir, with respect, putting recruits, even talented ones, in front of foreign dignitaries could reflect poorly on our entire military if something goes wrong." Marcus considered this concern. Hayes wasn't wrong about the risks. The traditional approach of having senior officers perform demonstrations had consistently produced disappointing results, at least when Marcus was involved. Perhaps it was time to let the success of his training method speak for itself. "Lieutenant Hayes, I want you to observe our afternoon training session before making any final judgments," Marcus said. "See what these men can actually do, and tell me if you think they're not ready for a public demonstration." That afternoon, the secluded training courtyard buzzed with activity as Marcus put his advanced students through their most challenging exercises. Collins, Jensen, Rodriguez, and the 6 other guards who had joined the program over the past month worked in pairs and small groups, executing complex shooting scenarios that would have been impossible for them just weeks earlier. Hayes watched in amazement as the guards successfully hit moving targets, shot accurately around obstacles, and maintained precision while under simulated combat pressure. The transformation in their abilities was undeniable, and the confidence they displayed was a stark contrast to the uncertain recruits they had been before Marcus's advanced training. "How did you achieve this?" Hayes asked quietly as they watched Collins thread an arrow through a narrow gap to strike a target positioned 30 meters behind. "Individual attention, practical application, and training that builds confidence rather than exposing weaknesses," Marcus replied. "These men have learned that accuracy isn't just about perfect form. It's about understanding your equipment, reading conditions, and maintaining focus under pressure." Lady Catherine approached from the castle. Having observed the training session from a balcony overlooking the courtyard, her presence had become a regular feature of the advanced training program, and her insights into military strategy had proven valuable in designing realistic exercises. "Impressive, as always, Captain," she said. Joining Marcus and Hayes, "I believe these men are ready for whatever challenges the hunting demonstration might present." Hayes looked between Marcus and Catherine, clearly recognizing the partnership that had developed between them in creating the advanced training program. "Lady Catherine, have you been involved in the planning of this demonstration?" "I've been involved in ensuring that our kingdom's finest military capabilities are properly showcased," Catherine replied diplomatically. "The Aldermere delegation expects to see exceptional skill, and I believe Captain Thornfield's students can provide exactly that." As the training session concluded, Marcus gathered his students to discuss the upcoming hunting expedition. The men listened attentively as he explained the format of the demonstration and the importance of representing their kingdom well. "Sir," Rodriguez asked, "will you be participating in the shooting demonstration as well?" The question Marcus had been dreading hung in the air. He could lead from behind, coordinating the demonstration while his students performed, or he could face his fears and participate alongside them. The decision would send a message not just to the foreign delegation, but to his own men about his confidence in both himself and their training. "Yes," Marcus said, surprising everyone, including himself. "I will be participating." Collins smiled with genuine warmth. "Sir, we'd be honored to have you shooting alongside us. Just remember," Jensen added with a grin, "we learned everything we know from you. If we perform well, it reflects your instruction. And if we make mistakes, well, that reflects your instruction too." The group laughed, but Marcus recognized the deeper meaning in Jensen's words. His students had grown confident enough to joke with him, but they also understood that their performance would be seen as a direct reflection of his teaching abilities. The pressure he felt wasn't just about his own shooting anymore. It was about proving that his methods could produce results. Even when subjected to public scrutiny, Lady Catherine approached him as the guards dispersed, Zoe, to prepare their equipment for the expedition. "Captain, are you certain you're ready for this? There's no shame in allowing your students to demonstrate what they've learned while you coordinate from a supporting role." Marcus appreciated her concern, but he had made his decision. "These men have put their trust in my instruction and my methods. The least I can do is show the same confidence in both that they have. And what if the pressure affects your performance the way it has in previous public demonstrations?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Then I'll deal with the consequences. But Catherine, these past weeks have shown me something important. When I focus on the mission rather than the audience, when I concentrate on practical results rather than perfect form, my abilities improve dramatically, even with foreign dignitaries watching." "We'll find out," Marcus replied with a smile. "Besides, if I fail spectacularly, at least my students will be there to show everyone what proper archery looks like." Catherine laughed, recognizing both the humor and the genuine confidence in his statement. "In that case, Captain, I look forward to watching you and your men demonstrate just how effective your training methods have become." As they walked back toward the castle, Marcus felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety about the upcoming demonstration. For the first time in years, however, the anticipation outweighed the anxiety. His students had given him something he hadn't realized he had lost: faith in his own abilities as both archer and instructor. The morning of the royal hunting expedition dawned crisp and clear, the light breeze that would challenge even experienced archers. Marcus arrived at the assembly grounds before sunrise. Finding his advanced training students already checking their equipment with the methodical precision he had drilled into them over the past months, the hunting party was impressive in both size and grandeur. King Edmund sat astride his magnificent stallion, resplendent in hunting attire that somehow managed to be both practical and regal. Beside him rode Lord Aldrich of Aldermere, a stern-faced man whose reputation as a military strategist was matched only by his kingdom's fame for producing exceptional archers. Behind the two leaders, a contingent of nobles and military officers from both kingdoms chatted quietly among themselves, their conversations occasionally interrupted by glances toward the group of guards preparing for the demonstration. Marcus noticed several of the Aldermere officers studying his men with professional interest, clearly evaluating their equipment and bearing. "Nervous, sir?" Collins asked quietly as he approached Marcus, his bow case slung over his shoulder. "Focused," Marcus replied, though his stomach churned with familiar anxiety. "Remember, today isn't about impressing anyone. It's about demonstrating the practical skills you've mastered. Trust your training and execute the techniques we've practiced. Lady Catherine approached on horseback, her own bow secured to her saddle in preparation for the hunt. She had proven to be an accomplished archer in her own right during their training sessions, and her presence provided Marcus with an unexpected source of confidence. "Captain," she said with a warm smile, "your men look ready for anything." "They are," Marcus replied. And for the first time in years, he meant it completely. Lord Commander Harrison, Marcus's old friend and the highest-ranking military officer present, called for attention. The demonstration would begin with stationary targets at various distances, followed by moving targets, and conclude with a practical hunting scenario involving multiple targets and challenging conditions. Captain Thornfield Harrison announced, "Please prepare your men for the archery demonstration." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest as dozens of eyes focused on him, but something was different this time. Instead of the crushing weight of expected failure, he felt the steady presence of his students around him. Collins moved to his right, Jensen to his left, and the others arranged themselves in supporting positions. They weren't just witnesses to his performance. They were partners in demonstrating the effectiveness of their shared training. The first round involved targets placed at distances of 50, 75, and 100 meters. Lord Aldrich watched intently as Marcus's students took their positions, his experienced eye evaluating their stance and preparation. "Interesting." Formation, one of the Aldermere officers murmured to his companion. "Their positioning suggests coordinated shooting rather than individual demonstration." Marcus heard the comment and realized that his training methods had created something unexpected. His students naturally worked as a unit, supporting and complementing each other's abilities rather than competing for individual recognition. "Begin when ready." Captain King Edmund called out. Marcus knocked his arrow and drew the bow, feeling the familiar resistance of the string and the weight of the projectile. But instead of focusing on the watching crowd, he concentrated on the target, on the wind conditions, on the mechanical execution of the shot he had practiced thousands of times in solitude. The arrow flew true, striking the center ring of the 50-meter target with a satisfying thud. Around him, his students released their arrows in a coordinated sequence, each finding their mark with precision that drew murmurs of approval from the watching nobles. "Excellent," Lord Aldrich said, though his tone suggested he had expected no less from the opening round. The longer distances proved more challenging, with crosswinds affecting arrow trajectory and the smaller target faces requiring exceptional accuracy. Marcus felt his confidence growing as each shot found its mark. It's not perfectly centered, but consistently within the scoring rings. More importantly, his students were performing flawlessly. Their arrows grouped tightly in the target centers with mechanical precision as they moved to the moving target phase. Marcus noticed Lord Aldrich speaking quietly with one of his officers. The Aldermere delegation was clearly reassessing their initial impressions of the guards' capabilities. The moving targets consisted of wooden deer figures pulled along tracks at various speeds and angles. This exercise required shooters to calculate lead times and adjust for the target's movement while maintaining accuracy under time. Pressure Collins stepped forward for the first shot, tracking a deer figure moving at moderate speed across his field of view. His arrow caught the wooden animal perfectly in what would have been a clean kill shot on a live target. The watching nobles erupted in appreciative murmurs. But Marcus noticed that Lord Aldrich remained stoic, clearly waiting to see if this was skill or luck. Jensen followed with an even more difficult shot, taking down a target moving at sharp angle that required him to shoot through a gap between trees. Rodriguez completed the sequence by successfully hitting a target moving directly away from his position. One of the most challenging shots in archery. When Marcus's turn came, he faced a target moving erratically, changing speed and direction in a pattern designed to simulate a panicked animal. The shot required not just accuracy, but the ability to predict the target's movement and adjust his aim accordingly. He drew the bowstring back, feeling the familiar tension, but this time the tremor in his hands was barely noticeable. His focus was entirely on the target, on reading its pattern and finding the moment when his arrow would intersect its path. The release was smooth, instinctive, and perfect. The arrow struck the wooden deer precisely in the vital area, and this time even Lord Aldrich nodded in visible approval. King Edmund clapped enthusiastically, clearly pleased with the display of skill from his guards. Remarkable shooting, Captain Lord Aldrich said as the moving target phase concluded. Your men demonstrate exceptional coordination and individual skill. I'm curious about the training methods that produced such results. Marcus felt a surge of pride, not just in his own performance, but in the achievements of his students. Thank you, my lord. We focus on practical application and real-world scenarios rather than formal target shooting. Each archer learns to adapt to challenging conditions while maintaining the fundamental principles of accuracy, and you develop these methods yourself. Through years of experience and observation, yes, every archer faces unique challenges. An effective training must address individual needs while building overall competency. The final phase of the demonstration was designed to simulate actual hunting conditions. Multiple targets were positioned throughout a wooded area, requiring the archers to move between shooting positions, engage targets at various ranges and angles, and demonstrate their ability to function effectively in realistic field conditions. Marcus led his team through the course, calling out targets and coordinating their movements with the efficiency of a veteran hunting party. His students responded with the precision and confidence that months of intensive training had developed, each shot finding its mark despite the challenging conditions as they completed the final sequence. Marcus realized that something extraordinary had happened. Not only had he performed well in front of the largest and most important audience he had ever faced, but he had enjoyed the experience. The pressure that had paralyzed him for years had transformed into focus and determination. Lord Aldrich approached as the demonstration concluded, his expression showing genuine respect. Captain Thornfield, I must commend you and your men on an exceptional display. In all my years of military service, I have rarely seen such consistent accuracy combined with practical field skills. Your training methods are clearly superior to our traditional approaches, added one of the Aldermere officers. Our king would be very interested in learning more about your techniques. King Edmund beamed with pride as he addressed the gathering. Captain Thornfield has been developing advanced archery training for our guard over the past months. The results, as you have seen, speak for themselves. Lady Catherine caught Marcus's eye and smiled with obvious satisfaction. Her careful orchestration had led to this moment of triumph, not just for him, but for the kingdom's military reputation. As the hunting party prepared to move deeper into the forest for the actual hunt, Collins approached Marcus with obvious excitement. Sir, that was incredible. I've never shot better in my life. You shot exactly as you have in our training sessions, Marcus replied. The only difference was the audience, and audiences don't affect arrow flight. Jensen laughed. Easy for you to say, sir. You looked like you were born with a bow in your hands out there. Marcus considered the comment, realizing that Jensen was right. For the first time in years, archery had felt natural and instinctive again. The secret wasn't overcoming his performance anxiety, it was replacing it with focus on practical objectives and trust in proven methods. As they rode deeper into the hunting grounds, Lord Aldrich fell into step beside Marcus. Captain, I hope you'll consider my earlier suggestion about sharing your training methods. A formal exchange between our kingdoms, military instructors could benefit both our forces. I would be honored to participate in such an exchange. Marcus replied, meaning every word. The remainder of the hunting expedition proceeded flawlessly, with Marcus and his students contributing significantly to the success of the hunt. But more importantly, Marcus had rediscovered the confidence and joy that had first drawn him to archery years ago. The mocking whispers and disappointed looks were replaced by respect and admiration, not just from foreign dignitaries, but from his own men and peers. As they returned to the castle that evening, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The injury that had robbed him of his confidence had ultimately led to the development of training methods that surpassed anything he could have achieved through individual excellence alone. His greatest failure had become the foundation for his most significant success. 6 months after the royal hunting expedition, Marcus stood before the largest gathering of military officers he had ever addressed. Representatives from 5 kingdoms had come to observe and learn from the advanced archery training program that had gained legendary status throughout the region. The great hall of the castle buzzed with conversation in multiple languages as officers compared notes and discussed training methodologies. King Edmund had formally established the Royal Academy of Advanced Archery, with Marcus as its chief instructor, and requests for training positions had arrived from across the continent. What had begun as a desperate attempt to overcome personal limitations had evolved into a revolutionary approach to military education that was reshaping how kingdoms prepared their archers for combat. Collins, now promoted to sergeant and serving as Marcus's primary assistant instructor, approached with the day's training schedule. The young man who had once mocked his captain's abilities now possessed skills that rivaled the finest archers in any army, and his transformation remained a source of pride for Marcus. Sir Collins said, his voice carrying the confidence that effective training had instilled. The representatives from Valdris are particularly interested in our pressured training methods. They've heard about your techniques for maintaining accuracy under combat stress. Marcus nodded, still somewhat amazed by the reversal of fortunes that had brought him to this moment. The very pressure that had once paralyzed him had become the cornerstone of his most effective training innovations. By learning to work with anxiety rather than fighting against it, he had discovered methods for teaching others to perform reliably under the most challenging conditions. Lady Catherine entered the hall, accompanied by Lord Aldrich, who had returned specifically to observe the expanded training program. The partnership that had developed between Marcus and Catherine had proven invaluable in designing curricula that addressed both practical military needs and the psychological challenges that affected archer performance. Captain Thornfield, Lord Aldrich said warmly, I must thank you again for accepting my kingdom's request to train our elite archery unit. The improvement in their capabilities has been remarkable. The Aldermere unit had spent 3 months training under Marcus's supervision, and their success had generated the international interest that filled the hall today. More importantly for Marcus personally, working with foreign students had confirmed that his methods were universally applicable rather than simply effective with his familiar recruits. The pleasure has been mine, Lord Aldrich, Marcus replied. Your archers brought excellent fundamental skills to the program. We simply refined their techniques and added practical applications. Refined is a modest way to describe what you accomplished, Catherine interjected with a smile. Their accuracy scores improved by 40%, and their performance consistency under pressure nearly doubled. These quantifiable results had attracted the attention of military leaders who might have otherwise dismissed Marcus's unconventional methods. The combination of measurable improvement and practical battlefield application had elevated archery. Training from a traditional skill to a strategic military asset, Jensen approached the group, carrying a detailed report on the morning's training exercises. Now serving as the Academy's senior evaluator, he was responsible for assessing student progress and identifying areas where training methods could be further refined. Sir, Jensen said, offering the report to Marcus, the new group from Westmark is progressing ahead of schedule. Their leader, Captain Torres, is requesting permission to extend their training period to include the advanced tactical modules. Marcus reviewed the assessment quickly, noting the consistent high marks across all evaluation categories. The standardized training system he had developed allowed him to accurately predict student progress and customize instruction based on individual needs and capabilities. Approved, Marcus said. Captain Torres impressed me with his dedication during the foundational training. He has the discipline necessary for advanced tactical instruction. As the morning progressed, Marcus conducted demonstration sessions for the visiting officers, showing them the practical applications of techniques their kingdom's archers would learn. The demonstrations had become routine for him now, but he never forgot the years of struggle that had preceded this success. During a break between sessions, Marcus found himself alone with Catherine in the castle's garden, a place that had become their regular meeting spot for discussing academy, business, and planning future expansions. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Collins hadn't discovered your secret training area that morning? Catherine asked, settling onto a stone bench beneath an ancient oak tree. Marcus considered the question seriously. I think eventually something would have forced me to confront my limitations. Your intervention simply accelerated the process and guided it in a more productive direction. You give me too much credit, Catherine replied. The methods you developed, the insights you gained about training and performance, those came from your own experience and analysis. I simply helped create the circumstances where your knowledge could be properly applied. And now that knowledge is spreading to kingdoms across the continent, Marcus mused. Sometimes I can hardly believe how dramatically everything has changed. Catherine smiled. The archer who couldn't hit a target in public has become the most sought-after archery instructor in the known world. There's a certain poetic justice to that transformation. As they talked, Aqueous reflected on the deeper lessons he had learned through his journey. The injury that had robbed him of his confidence had ultimately taught him empathy for students facing their own challenges. The public failures that had humiliated him had developed his understanding of performance psychology and the importance of creating supportive learning environments. Most importantly, he had learned that true expertise wasn't measured by individual performance under ideal conditions, but by the ability to share knowledge effectively and help others achieve their potential. The skills he had hidden in solitary practice sessions had become the foundation for teaching methods that transformed not just individual archers, but entire military organizations. A messenger arrived with news that would mark another milestone in Marcus's evolution as an instructor. The king of the Sara had formally requested that Marcus establish a branch of the academy in their kingdom, offering resources and authority that would allow him to train instructors who could spread his methods even further. It seems your influence is expanding beyond what we ever imagined possible, Catherine said after reading the message. Are you prepared for that level of responsibility? Marcus thought about the scared, trembling captain who had stood before mocking recruits just over a year ago, and then considered the confident instructor he had become. The transformation hadn't eliminated his fears or limitations, but it had taught him to work with them rather than being defeated by them. I think I'm ready, he said finally. But more importantly, I know my methods work because they've been tested by students far more talented than I ever was individually. Collins, Jensen, Rodriguez, and all the others have proven that effective instruction can overcome almost any limitation. As the afternoon training sessions began, Marcus watched his students work with visiting officers from distant kingdoms. The knowledge that had once been his lonely secret was now spreading across the continent. Carried by students who would become instructors themselves, standing in the doorway of the Great Hall, observing the organized chaos of international military training, Marcus smiled at the irony of his situation. The royal guard who had been mocked for his poor archery had become the man responsible for training the finest archers in the known world. The transformation was complete, but Marcus understood that it represented not an ending, but a beginning. Each new group of students brought fresh challenges and opportunities to refine his methods. Each successful graduate carried the potential to further expand the influence of practical, effective archery training. As the sun set over the castle grounds, Marcus prepared for another evening of planning sessions and curriculum development. The work was demanding, but it fulfilled him in ways that individual archery excellence never could have achieved. He had discovered that the greatest victories were measured not by personal achievement, but by the success of those he had taught to exceed his own abilities. The mocking laughter had been replaced by respectful attention, the disappointed shakes of the head by enthusiastic applause, but most importantly, the isolation of hidden practice had been transformed into the shared purpose of advancing military effectiveness across the known world. Captain Marcus Thornfield had finally found his true calling, not as the kingdom's finest archer, but as the instructor who made other archers finer than he had ever dreamed of becoming himself.